Hello, and welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Truth about password managers. Today's webinar is sponsored by KnowBe4 and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Now, our speakers got a ton of great information to share that will take up the full hour, so we won't have a live Q&A at the end of the presentation. However, we will pass along all your questions to the team at KnowBe4 for follow-up. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we will provide further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to get started with KnowBe4. Also in there, you can find a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to check out those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. So with all that out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, the one and only Roger Grimes, who's a data-driven security evangelist with KnowBe4. So I always learn many things from Roger, but I'm especially interested to hear his insights today on password managers. So let's turn things over to Roger to get us started.
Hello, everyone, for showing up for my webinar on password managers, the good, the bad, and the truth about password managers. I get a lot of questions about using password managers because I recommend people use password managers, but they also end up in the news when they're hacked. And so a lot of people will say, should I really use a password manager? That is kind of what this talk is all about today. If you haven't met me before, I'm Roger Grimes. I've been doing computer security probably going on 35 years. I was even a penetration tester for 20 years where I did a lot of password hacking and password hash cracking and that sort of stuff. I've written 13 books, including one. My first book was an ebook that I wrote that was on passwords. So I've been doing password and password hacking for decades now. And I've written probably over 1,300 magazine articles. There's some of my books. The one on passwords is not there because it's an early ebook and it's just not published anymore. I work for KnowBe4. We're the world's largest security awareness training and simulated phishing platform vendor. We try to help people not to be phished, and that's a good thing because most passwords and most hacking and malware spread because of social engineering and phishing, which we'll talk about during this talk a bit. So I love working for KnowBe4 because we try to put down the biggest ways that people are hacked. So we're going to have the talk today is broken down kind of into four pieces. Why use a password manager? Because I and KnowBe4 and lots of other people recommend that you use a password manager. Most people don't. So we're going to talk about why you should. Then I'll talk about the common features of a password manager and maybe some of the uncommon features. And then we'll go into how password managers can be attacked. I'll even show you a demo from our Chief Hacking Officer, Kevin Mitnick, hacking a password manager. And then talk about how you can choose the best password manager and how you can best defend the password manager that you decide to use. So again, we're going to start with why you should use a password manager, and you should use a password manager. And this is the reason why. Without a password manager, the average person will have 3 to 19 passwords that they use on over 170 websites. And most of those passwords will be fairly weak. So again, the average person has to log into over 170 websites with or without a password manager. And if you don't have a password manager, that means, and most of those sites and services will not accept multi-factor authentication or passwordless authentication. Most websites and services require that you use a login name and password. And if you have over 170 websites and services you have to log on with a password, most people end up just having a handful or so of passwords or password patterns that are similar to each other that they use to log on to all those other websites. That is bad, because if one of those websites gets compromised, that means a hacker has a password or password pattern that may work on other websites and services that you use. And just in general, user-created passwords are typically weak and not that hard to guess or crack. And we're going to talk about that data coming forward. But just ultimately, why you should use a password manager is that if you don't, there's lots of passwords that are easy for adversaries to guess, and one compromise of one of those shared passwords will more easily lead to other compromises on other stuff you belong to. So maybe they break into a website that, where you go to because you like cats, and then they use it to break into your work account or your Amazon account or Twitter account or something like that. And again, one of the biggest problems is that most user-created passwords are weak. Even if you're required to use what's called complexity today, most complex passwords just aren't that complex. In the world of password creation, how strong or weak a password is known as entropy. Most user-created passwords are weak because they have low entropy, which means they really don't have a whole lot of randomness, even if they're required to have quote-unquote complexity. Most people's complexity means that they have to use an uppercase character, and if so, most people almost always put the uppercase character in the first position, and it's usually followed by a lowercase vowel, A, E, I, O, or U. Most people are using names or words as the kind of the root of their password, and they'll uppercase the first digit, which is usually a consonant, followed by a lowercase vowel, A, E, I, O, or U if you're in the American language. And if they're required to use a number or symbol, the numbers are going to be 1 or 2 in most cases and be at the end. And if they're required to use symbols, again, they'll usually be at the end, usually only a couple symbols that people use. The average keyboard has like 94 characters, but most people don't use anywhere, anywhere close to the 94 different characters. Most people will use the same 17 characters for their password. Something like 90% of people use the same 17 characters on a keyboard. So, like a lot of people aren't using Z or space or something like that. So these passwords you see here, these examples, they really, in today's world, they'd be considered, oh, that's complex. It's really not that complex, and it has low entropy, and it's not that hard for hackers to guess at, or if they get your password hashed, to crack your password. If you wanted a really strong password that you create, you could do a passphrase that doesn't begin with an uppercase character and doesn't have a lowercase character in the second position. And maybe in that better example there, I still am using the number 2, but at least it's in the middle and not at the end, and have some other symbols and some uppercase, lowercase throughout that. So if you want to create a human-based password that can withstand password hash cracking or guessing, that password, if you truly want it to be strong, has to be 20 characters or longer and have some unusual, unpredictable complexity. And really what you want to use, if you can, and this is another reason why I recommend that you use a password manager, is that you want to use truly random passwords. If you take a look here at these 3 truly random passwords, let me say this, a 12-character truly random password is unguessable, unhackable with any known technology. The problem is people don't like to create truly random passwords, and they certainly don't like to type them in and use them. But with the password manager, it could easily create these truly random passwords, and then you can use them as easy as clicking on your password manager website entry. So one of the biggest reasons to use the password manager is it creates and allows you to use, without you needing to even know about it, truly complex passwords that, again, are uncrackable, unguessable, especially as compared to most people's passwords. Just recently, there was a survey, or there was a report done in the U.S. by the Department Inspector General on some U.S. departments like the Bureau of Land Management and stuff, and they they got the password hashes of 85, almost 86,000 accounts that was in their environment, and they could quickly break 16% of those. 16% of the accounts that they found, they cracked within 90 minutes. And it's interesting, they ended up cracking 1/5 of all accounts. And I don't know what type of powered machines they used and how long they tried to crack them, but it's interesting that, about a fifth of the user account passwords they were able to crack, including some elevated accounts and that sort of stuff, and senior U.S. government employee accounts. They were able to crack 21%, just over a fifth of accounts. But again, if they were able to crack the password, 16% of those passwords, so over 3/4 of the ones they did crack, they cracked in 90 minutes, in the first 90 minutes of testing. So, it kind of seems to be that most people have a password that's really, really easy to crack. And if it didn't crack, very quickly, then odds were that you were going to survive the whole exercise of them trying to guess at your password hash. But, it was interesting. They said the most common password was password, involved password or password 1234. And, and this is in a company and in, agencies where they require complexity. And you can see they were breaking passwords like change me 12345 or polar bear or national parks. If you look at all of those passwords in that second bullet point that they cracked, they all followed kind of that same complexity pattern of uppercase character, typically a consonant followed by a lower case character, although the first one, change me, didn't have a vowel, but you can see the vowel follows pretty there soon after. And the numbers are at the end. The numbers and symbols are at the end. So again, and let me say, it's been this way for as long as passwords have been around. They've been, passwords are most human created passwords are fairly predictable, and that hasn't changed. And part of the problem is that a lot of online login portals allow hundreds of thousands of guesses without locking the attacker out. These days, a lot of logon portals will have what's called account lockout, and if an attacker tries to guess against some passwords, the attacker can only have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 bad guesses before it locks out the account. But today's password hacks or password guessing attacks do what's called password spray attacks, which is they will guess slow enough that it doesn't kick off the account lockout, but across every account they possibly could. And they will start if the password policy is you can only guess 6 times against the password without locking it out, they will only guess 5 times and wait till the lockout period passes, which is usually 45 minutes, an hour a day, but keep doing it. And a lot of times they'll find login portals or what's called APIs that they can guess against, thousands of times a minute. A lot of the times the typical traditional login portals like your email login portal, network login portal, VPN login portal has account lockout enabled, but hackers are really good at finding login portals that the defenders didn't think about, especially APIs are used a whole lot, and then the attacker can guess and guess and guess without having to be worried about being locked out. Not only this, but if the password hacker gets a hold of your password hash, they can actually guess at your password tens of trillions of times a second. Imagine would your password, think about your passwords that you use once you've created. Do you think if an attacker could guess tens of trillions of times a second against your password, do you think that your password would survive? And again, a lot of people's didn't. A lot of passwords fall in minutes to seconds. And again, something like 75% of the passwords that did fail within the first 90 minutes. Most passwords made up by people are guessable within the lifetime of the password, which typically these days, most passwords either don't have to be changed at all or only have to be changed once a year or something like that. But again, when a hacker gets a password hash, they typically can break most of them fairly quickly, within 90 minutes, or a lot of them. And if they can guess at your password, typically, again, they can guess it within a human-created password, within the lifetime of the pass, whatever that happens to be. If you're interested in a bunch of how hackers hack passwords and attack passwords, take a look at my webinar on password attacks called the Password Masterclass. It's a really good one to watch. But one company, Acme, which is a big load balancing provider on the internet, they said they saw 61 billion credential stuffing password guessing attacks. That slow password guessing that I talked about. They saw 61 billion of those attacks in a year and a half. Just one company that's on the internet saw 61 billion credential stuffing attacks in a year and a half. It just means that password guessing is rampant and going on all over the place. So the biggest password problem and risk today is that hackers can just often guess at people's passwords, even if they have, what we think of as traditional complexity. Here's another example. I forget where I got this out of. I think it was off Brian Krebs' website or something, but this guy talked about that he knew of this one criminal group that took 5 to 10 million email authentication guesses a day and would walk away with 50,000 to 100,000 working inbox credentials. So again, these are just one group would do 5 to 10 million email logon attempts a day and come away with 50,000 to 100,000 working inbox credentials that they guessed at. Microsoft said in the December 2020 post that 1 in every 250 of their corporate accounts are compromised each month. Each month. It's a lot of successful password guessing going on, or social engineering. There are tens of billions of passwords on the internet and what's called password dumps. So when the hackers get them, they often put them in publicly available password dumps that anybody can look at, although many times they're private. But you can actually look up and see, if your email address or your logon has been compromised and is one of those password dumps. Probably the most popular website to do this is called Have I Been Pwned? Troy Hunt, a guy that either worked for Microsoft or still works for Microsoft, Troy Hunt, created this website, haveibeenpwned.com. But you can see there, he says that he keeps a track of 12 billion different accounts that have been compromised from 646 different compromised websites. And that they keep track of, they call them the password dumps, they call them paste in this case, but that means there's over 100,000 different password dumps that his site is keeping track of. And again, you can put your email address, whatever your login name is, or phone number, to see has it been pawned in a particular website that's been compromised. And I can give you an example of mine. I put in my personal email address here, and have I been pawned? And it said, oh, your passwords have been pawned in 14 data breaches. So let me say again, I didn't lose my passwords to these websites by being socially engineered, although that is the most common way that somebody loses their password. They get socially engineered out of it. But in these cases, the websites themselves, and they're really popular websites, Facebook, Twitter, Citibank, government website, Experian, my healthcare provider, those websites that I joined and put in a login name and password got compromised by hackers through no fault of my own. I didn't do anything wrong. Those websites were exploited, and then these hackers got my passwords. And if my passwords had patterns, let me say back, for a decade or two, my passwords were the same or had patterns that hackers now can see. They can literally look up, they have lots of tools to look up people's compromised passwords. And if I had, let's say I had a pattern, let me say years ago, I used to do something like I'd say frog FB for Facebook, frog TW for Twitter, frog I for Instagram or something like that. I used to think I was pretty cool because I had a different password for every website, but it was a pattern. And I didn't realize how easy it would be for an attacker if they were dumping all the stolen passwords to go, oh, Roger likes the word frog or whatever. And I wasn't using frog, but we can assume I was. I had a pattern, and it'd be really easy to go, oh, let's go try frog A for Amazon. If they would have tried it, they would have broken into my Amazon account. So that's one of the biggest risks that a password manager can offset, because it can create truly unique passwords. And let me say that the length of your password kind of matters, especially if they get your password hash instead of the plain text password. And you can see in here, like on, this is a chart of how quickly password hash cracking could occur against perfectly random passwords. So this would be the best password you could possibly use. A perfectly random password is the best possible password you could use. Those are the type of passwords that come out of a password manager. But if you look, go to the NT one here, if you had a perfectly random password, up to about 10 characters, it doesn't take a password hash cracking rig long to crack. It would only take it about 3 weeks to crack a 10-character password. But as you start to move to 11-character perfectly random password or a 12-character perfectly random password, it starts to become really, really secure, right? So if you have a 12-character Windows password, and they're able to get your Windows password hash called NT hash, and it's 12 characters or longer, perfectly random, it's going to take them 538 years to crack. But if you're like the average person creates like an 8-character password, look at that, 3.5 minutes. So this is why, and by the way, if you're using a Linux or an Apple system, it's typically using that SHA-256. And you can see that perfectly random, again, all of them to about 10 characters perfectly random are fairly crackable, guessable in a normal period of time. But once you start getting to 11 and 12, it starts to become a whole lot of years that your password is going to be able to withstand the attack if it's perfectly random. And for this reason, this is why I recommend that everybody use 12-character perfectly random passwords. 12 characters or longer. And again, password managers can create and use 12-character perfectly random passwords or even longer with no problem. And that way, if an attacker is trying to guess against your password that you've created with a password manager, good luck, they're never going to guess it. And even if they have your password hashes, which can occur sometimes, they're not going to be successful if your 12 characters perfectly random or longer. So your password hashing, the typical person that makes a password, almost all passwords made up by people are guessable within the lifetime of their password, most of them within hours to days. And that's because these password hash cracking rigs can guess 45 trillion guesses per second, or if an online portal is available, the hacker can usually just keep on guessing till eventually they break the password. But a 12-character perfectly random password is unguessable, uncrackable, and a password manager not only can do 12-character perfectly random password, they can do 15, 16, 20. They can do as long as you want it to be, as long as the website allows you to use for your password. But if you create a password out of your head, you need to create a 20-character or longer password. If you create it out of your head, for it to be unguessable, uncrackable. I mean, that's if you're doing the traditional, complexity, like Roger G12 or something like that. Your password needs to be significantly longer. And that's because I know of people that routinely break 18-character passwords every single day. Let me say this again. I know of people that crack user-created passwords that are 18 characters long if they get the password hashes all the time. And there are people that have successfully guessed on the internet 10 and 12 and longer passwords just on an online portal that they're allowed to guess against. But if you want your password that you create out of your head to be uncrackable and guessable, it needs to be 20 characters or longer. But if you have a perfectly random password, then it only needs to be 12 characters. And again, if you're interested on what I'm talking about here on password attacks and that sort of stuff, you can go download. I've got a webinar on password attacks that you can go view, and even some ebooks and things like that that you can get. So one of the number one major benefit of a password manager, and the reason why you should use a password manager, is they allow you to create and easily use long, unique, strong, perfectly random passwords that are different for every website and service. That stops hackers from guessing at them. It stops hackers from if they compromise the website from using it on anymore. If their unique password perfectly random, they're not going to be able to use that password to attack any other website except for the one that they compromised. And you can easily synchronize those passwords that the password manager creates between different devices and OS. So, if I change a password on my work computer, I can still use that password when I'm on my mobile phone or my personal laptop or something like that. And there's other benefits depending on what password manager. Most password managers have other additional benefits, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But for all these reasons, this is why you should use a password manager, because it allows you to create and easily use strong, unique, perfectly random passwords that are different for every website and service. That's why you and everybody else should use a password manager. And let me put it in perspective, though. Our official password policy, my official password policy, KnowBe4's official password policy, is that you should use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication wherever you can to protect valuable data and sites. You shouldn't even use passwords if you can get away from it. Use MFA, phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, if you can. But not most websites and services don't accept multi-factor authentication, so you're going to have to use a password. And if you're going to use passwords, you should have a password manager to allow it to create 12-character perfectly random passwords, because it defeats all known password guessing cracking attacks. If you must create a password out of your head, it should be 20 characters or longer if you really want it to be, super protective. Because again, I know people that are routinely cracking 18-character human-created passwords all the time. So what are the common features of a password manager? you know, of course, what they do is most of them or all of them allow you to create and reuse passwords in different ways. But there's dozens of them out there, if not 100 different types of password managers. There's free ones, there's open source ones, there are commercial ones. I will say that you typically get what you pay for. The open source ones, although they're free and neat, they're not normally as feature rich as the commercial ones. And let me say, some of the commercial vendors have both free and commercial versions, and the free versions from the commercial vendors are usually, again, still more features than open source. A lot of people like open source password managers because they just feel like they don't have a vendor behind it and they can look at the source code and all that other stuff. But in general, you get what you paid for. Password managers, some of them are part of your browser. So if you use Chrome or Edge or something, many times go, hey, do you want me to save your password? So they can even create unique passwords and then reuse them. So a lot of browsers have that functionality built in. They can be part of your operating system. So Apple and Windows and stuff will say that they have password managers that's part of the OS that can log into different websites. Sometimes password managers or the features of password managers, or they're part of some security suite, like you bought Norton, and Norton will offer a password manager as part of that. And there's a bunch, again, dozens to hundreds of standalone password managers. Something to keep in mind when you go to choose a password manager is that you essentially have to make sure it supports the operating system and browsers that you like to use. Like if you're a Firefox browser user or a Safari browser user or Mozilla or something like that, you have to, or Opera, which I like to use on my mobile phone. You want to make sure that your password manager supports that operating system and browser if you plan to use it across multiple desktops and devices. That's like step number one. We're like, oh, what password manager should I get? Well, what's the operating systems and browsers that you're hoping that it will work with? Most password managers have a desktop client, which means you download it to your desktop and it allows you to create and use passwords. But a lot of them have what's called browser extensions, and that's kind of nice, but again, only supports some browsers. But you enable the vendor's browser extension on your computer, and then it allows it to seamlessly log into a website. So, I have a password manager that uses a browser extension. And when I go into a particular website, my browser like, oh, click here. And when I click there, it auto fills in. So typically, if your password manager doesn't have a browser extension, you may have to edit, copy, edit, paste that password out of your password manager onto the website that you're trying to log into. But if it has a browser extension, then it has the ability to automatically log in for you. And that's a really, really good thing that can prevent social engineering attacks. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Some people, if you're trying to choose a password manager for your company and you want to manage it in an enterprise way to talk about minimum size of passwords and that they must be used and that sort of stuff, only the best password managers have enterprise support. So check and make sure if you have an enterprise and you buy a standalone password manager that doesn't have enterprise support, it will still work, but you won't have any capability of managing and making sure people use and that sort of stuff. And a lot of browsers have, a lot of password managers have family plans. So like when I bought a password manager for myself, I was able to give it to my wife and my kids if I wanted to do it. And I kind of like that because all my websites that I go to, if I die, my wife can access my password manager. And my kids know that if me and my wife dies, we actually have what's called a split key password. I sent part of a password to one kid and part of a password to another kid, and told them if me and your mother die in a car accident or airplane accident or something, you can get to my password manager, and it not only has access to all my websites, but I've put in like literally a secure note that said, this is what you need to do if I die. Here's where my retirement accounts are. Here's the stock accounts, that sort of stuff. So I kind of like that I can share, in the event of me, if I die accidentally early, my family has a way to figure out how to get, what I belong to and where the retirement money is and that sort of stuff. If you're interested in what password managers, that you really want to choose and what features you like, I really like Wired Magazine. There's a link at the bottom to Wired Magazine's. They've done 2 password manager reviews about a bunch of different password managers, and I kind of agree with what they say about the ones that they chose as their favorites for different reasons. They pick free and commercial ones and that sort of stuff. Here's some really, popular names that you'll see for password managers. The top 2 most popular password managers, I think, is 1Password and LastPass. And then I've got, the other ones that I have here are fairly popular. And again, a lot of these are open source or free. Most of these are standalone password managers, and probably about half of them are free, and maybe a little bit more, the middle over half of them are commercial, or they have both free and commercial versions. So, if it was me and I was checking out a password manager, these are certainly the ones that I would start with as being kind of mainstream and normal. And I'm sure somebody could, if you have a favorite password manager that I didn't list here, email me and I'll add it to the list for future versions of this webinar. But this is what I could think of and find off the top of my head. And again, if you're interested, I always think that you should review a password manager article or two before you choose a password manager. And again, the Wired magazine one's my favorite one, but there's some other ones here, some other reviews that you can read and why they like a particular password manager. I really don't, as long as you're choosing a good, secure, long-standing vendor, I don't think you can really go wrong, in my personal opinion. I do like, people ask me, well, what do you think about browser or operating system-based password managers versus standalone password managers? I like standalone password managers better because they typically just have more feature sets. They have a lot more features. It's the company's entire focus is like, I want to make a good password manager. They're typically troubleshooting bugs better. They add more features. They usually interact with the community more. And probably the biggest thing is that they're not tied to a particular browser. Like if you use a Chrome-based browser for your password manager, well, that's the only place that your password manager is going to work, and it won't work with any other product or software that doesn't work with that particular browser or browsers that if you have a browser-based password manager, it's typically only working with that browser. Same with OS. If you're using the password manager that's an Apple, well, that's great when you're an Apple, which is good. But then if you have a different type of cell phone or a different type of browser in your cell phone, it's not going to work. So again, just keep that in mind. I like standalone password managers better. So every password manager can store passwords. They can create passwords, store passwords. I would say that you want to make sure that your password manager can create perfectly random passwords. And probably one of the frustrations is some websites only take like 12-character passwords, and some sites will take like 100-character passwords. And sometimes you have to tell the password manager, hey, create a perfectly random password that can only be 12 characters long or 16 characters long, and can or can't have symbols or certain types of symbols. But you definitely want to choose a password manager that creates perfectly random passwords, and that look like gobbledygook. I wouldn't use a password manager without the ability for it to create perfectly random passwords. Also think that you want to use a password manager that has auto fill-in. You don't have to have that, but auto fill-in, again, is the idea that when I go to a website that I can click something and it will automatically fill in the website, the login name and password. Or maybe sometimes you have to do it within the password manager. You're in the password manager, and if you want to go to Amazon, you click on the password manager item for, Amazon, you click on it, and it logs you in. Any of those auto logins, I think, are good because it actually prevents social engineering, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But also, it's just easier. I had a password manager where I had to edit, copy, edit, paste every password, and I did that for years, and it wasn't bad. It took me, it just took a couple extra steps. But now that I have auto login and auto fill-in, much better experience, easier to use, and really, again, let me say super important here is auto fill-in will prevent social engineering attacks if you're paying attention. It's also good if, like when you have, if you have existing passwords, it's nice if your password manager reviews that password and tells you how strong it is. Or even when I first started using a password manager, I went, hey, a lot of these passwords are either identical, the same completely, which is the case for most people, or you have password patterns and really you need to change that. So I kind of like that. My password manager I use also tells me when a website gets compromised. So when Citibank got compromised, when Twitter and Facebook and Adobe.com got compromised, I actually got notification with my password manager faster telling me that I needed to change my password than the news stories broke out in most cases. So literally before it hit the news that Adobe's password database had been compromised, my password manager was telling me that my current Adobe password was, compromised and I needed to change it. I also like it if a lot of password managers will allow you to use multi-factor authentication to protect them instead of having to use a master password. Most password managers, you have to type in some master password to unlock them. Well, if you can use a multi-factor authentication to protect your password manager, that gives you some additional security and prevents some types of attack that we'll talk about in just a minute. So nice if you can use that. Some password managers can actually simulate other multi-factor authentication like Google Authenticator and log you into websites. So instead of you having to have a password manager and Google Authenticator and all these other MFAs, sometimes your password manager can simulate and become the MFA and again, auto log you into that site. That's kind of nice. A lot of times if you edit, copy, edit, paste your passwords, a lot of the password managers will expire your clipboard so that your password isn't forever out there on the clipboard. There have been some attacks over the decades where an attacker could get to your clipboard, and if they get to your clipboard and you put your passwords there, they're getting your passwords. And then a lot of them allow you to have secure notes and other safe storage. Like here's an example of a password manager again. In the first picture there, image on the left there, it's just them notifying me, hey, that my Citibank password was compromised. Again, kind of nice that they proactively told me that my password had been compromised. And then on the other side, you can see there's other things that you can easily store, like your credit cards or secure note. Again, one of the secure notes I use is to tell my kids what to do if I die, what lawyer to contact, and here's my retirement account. I literally have and for my wife as well, I go, if I die, click here. And it's a tab that just says everything they need to do and where everything's located. And you can put your medical records and a copy of your passport, and a copy of your digital driver's license. I think it's kind of nice to have that additional feature in a password manager if it has that ability. It's all in one place. How do you pick a password manager? Read some reviews. I've given you links where you can go read them. Again, I like that Wired magazine one there. Again, one of the first steps you need to do is inventory what operating system, devices, and browsers you must have support on there, especially if you're going to do synchronization of passwords across those devices, but you don't want to choose a password manager that doesn't support your stuff. And again, do you want automatic device synchronization or password synchronization? And what that means is if I change a password that, on a website while I'm on my laptop, when I go to use that website on my mobile phone, it already has the password change there. You also have to decide whether you mind, paying an annual fee or monthly fee or whatever it might be. Most of them are annual fees, or whether you want to use a free password manager. Do you need enterprise support? And then I say download at least 2 or 3 and try them because, you should be using a password manager the rest of your life, and you want to see which one that just seems to fit you and your personality better. And you definitely want to pick a long-lasting vendor that cares about security. And I'll cover what that really means in just a couple of minutes. Another really important consideration when you're choosing a password manager is where your passwords are stored. Early on, all password managers stored the passwords only locally, meaning that you install the password manager on your laptop, let's say, or mobile phone, and when you created and used the passwords, the only place those passwords were locally on the device where you had the password manager. But now they're being allowed to be in different places. With a lot of them, a lot of vendors will store the passwords in an encrypted state, hopefully, at their location or somewhere in the cloud that's used as part of their service. And that's mostly so that they can be kind of a backup, an emergency backup. Like if your laptop crashes or you lose your master password or something, if your passwords are stored somewhere else, there's a chance that you can still recover all those passwords without losing them all. Some of them, like if they're file-based password manager stores, you can store your passwords on like a portable USB key. So some people like that, so that their passwords aren't on any device at any one time unless they're using that device. So keep this in mind that like the password manager I use is stored with a vendor. It's encrypted. I trust that vendor. I don't mind it. Some people say that's a deal killer, and they're not going to use a password manager unless it only has the locally only stored option. And we'll talk about why that's important again, but it's a decision you need to make is, can you trust a vendor or another cloud vendor to store your passwords securely without being compromised? As some people have found, it's not always the case. So now we're going to talk about how password managers can be attacked. Let me say this, that as much as I love password managers, as much as I recommend password managers, they are a single point of failure risk, meaning if an attacker compromises your password manager, they kind of get all your passwords all at once, right? It's different when if they were to attack a single website, or they were maybe to keylog you as you type in a password or something like that. They're only getting one password at that website, or the password that you're typing in while they're keylogging you. They're not getting every single website and password that you log onto, that you have, well, those 170 websites or whatever that they would if they compromise your password manager. So this is a real risk that you have to figure out, can you accept that if they compromise your password manager, they get all of your passwords all at once as a single point of failure. There's 3 different general types of attacks against really any type of software with password managers. They can be remote attacks, local attacks, or attacks against the vendor. The remote attacks are the most common, and that's where the attacker is not on your desktop. They're not on your device, but they're targeting you in some way. And let me say, the most common way that a person with a password or a password manager, so it doesn't have to be even with a password manager, the most common way that people are targeted is social engineering. Social engineering is involved in about 70 to 90% of attacks. It is involved in most password attacks. And, they send you an email like this one. I got an example where it looks like it's coming from Netflix, but if this is from Netflix, but it's coming from modifiedity.com. And if I hover over the link that they're telling me to update my profile because my password, because my subscription's about to expire, it isn't saying Netflix.com. It's going to some other place there that's not Netflix.com. But if you don't realize that and you don't hover, you might give your password out to a fake website. Let me say this is where password managers really can save you, because if you have a password manager that has auto fill-in, auto login, or auto fill-in, if you get this fake website and you go to click on it, it won't work. Like the password manager will not work because the password manager is tied to a particular logon domain, like Netflix.com. And if you go to click on something that's not Netflix.com, the password manager is not going to automatically log you in. But let me say, you can still be phished, because I know some people, and maybe this might even happen to me in a test, where they got a phishing email, they went to click and log in, and then, my password manager is not working. It's not working. So frustrating. They edit, copy, edit, paste it into the fake website. That's what you got to do, is just realize that, you want to allow your auto log on, auto fill in to work. And if it's not filling in, then something's going on. It could be a phishing attack. So you must train yourself. If you're using a password manager, you must train yourself to be on the lookout for these types of attacks, whether it's a fake phishing website where all of a sudden your password manager seems like it's not working. And, I wish the password manager would say, I'm sorry, this is a fake website. It looks like you're trying to be socially engineered. But the password manager doesn't know that you're being socially engineered. It has no idea. It's just like, oh, you're going to some website that I don't have a log-on password combination for that website. So if you're using a password manager that has auto log-on or auto fill-in, which you should use, because I think it really prevents these social engineering attacks, the most common type of social engineering attack, then you must train yourself that when the auto fill-in or auto login doesn't work, stop, slow down, and think, oh, this could be a social engineering attack. Because again, once in the test, I was fooled. I went, it's frustrating. My password manager's not working. And I edit, copied, edit, pasted the password in there. And boom, it was a phishing test from KnowBe4. And I got picked up for a phishing test and had to take some more training and change my password and that sort of stuff. So just be careful about that. After social engineering, again, social engineering is by far the #1 way that people get tricked out of their password. The other way, the number 2 way, is that someone has an unpatched vulnerability on their desktop or a server related to their desktop, and that's how the attacker comes in. Or they get socially engineered into downloading a Trojan horse program that then takes over their desktop. And let me say, that happens all the time. There's lots of these attacks where malware will come in and steal people's, like there's this Citadel Trojan that if it gets on your desktop, and again, you have to have a vulnerability. You have to have been socially engineered or have a vulnerability for them to get on your desktop. And when they're on your desktop, it's game over, whether you have a password manager or not. But there is malware. An example, I've got examples here of Citadel Trojan and Mass Logger and that sort of stuff, or Redline Stealer. that will look for will actually look for password managers. Most of them look for browser-based password managers. The vast majority of them look for Chrome. If you got Chrome, we'll go to see what passwords you might have stored there. But there are other ones that will look in other places. But essentially, if you get socially engineered into downloading a Trojan horse program, or they're able to exploit you because you're unpatched or you have a misconfiguration and that malware or the hacker gets on your system, it's game over. They're going to be able to get to your password managers. So it's essentially, if they get on your desktop, it's game over. Although, if your password manager is locked, they're usually not getting immediate access to all your passwords. So you do have some saving grace versus if it's stored in your browser. If it's in your browser, they can immediately download all those passwords really, really quickly. It's a very common thing that malware and hackers do, is to download all your passwords in your browser. But if you have a password manager program and it's locked, they don't immediately get to those passwords. They have to either wait for you to log on in, and then they can steal your passwords. They can install a keylogging Trojan to steal your passwords as you type them in or as you use them, or they're going to keylog. If you have a password manager, they're going to keylog your password manager's master password and then use that against your password manager at some other time when you're not paying attention, or at night or something like that. Or they can do some other trick. And I'm going to show you an example of some other trick where a hacker gets to a password manager even when it's locked or initially locked. So just remember this, whether it's a remote attack or a local attack, if the hacker or the malware is on the victim's desktop, it is game over. Although, again, if your password manager is not open, they're not getting to all those passwords right away. And a lot of password managers automatically lock up, will relock themselves after 10 minutes, 1 minute, 10 minutes, an hour, or something like that. You don't want to disable the auto lock, because that could save you. If your password manager's locked, they have to do something to get to those passwords, wait for you to log in or keylog you, or put a Trojan in there. I'm going to show you an example of a demo. It's a 4-minute demo by our Chief Hacking Officer, Kevin Mitnick, one of the world's most infamous hackers. He's going to show you how he gets to a password manager, how he gets the passwords out of a password manager. So he's on the network. He's going to assume that there's been a compromise. He's in a company, and he is able to access, he has the victim's IP address and the victim's password. He's done that, but he knows that victim has a password manager. This demo is going to show you how he can compromise the victim's password manager using its configuration file to get access to all the passwords, even when he's not on that victim's desktop. I want to show you how this is an example of how a password manager could be hacked. But again, has to be, this particular hack had to be on the network, has the victim's IP address and password. But if you haven't seen this before, it's kind of neat to watch. This is not a publicly...
So today, we're going to assume breach. We're going to assume we're in the network. And we're going to connect to the target workstation using the SMB protocol, the same protocol that's used to map a drive. We're going to backdoor the configuration file for the KeePass password manager, so when the victim opens up the password manager, it sends all their passwords to our command and control server in the Amazon cloud. So let me show you how this works. So over here, the first thing we're going to do is use SMB client, which is a tool to connect to the victim workstation. And I'm using the Kevin account because the workstation that I'm attacking is actually yours truly. So I'm going to connect to the workstation. I'm going to put in the password because, again, assume breach. Assume that we have access to one or more workstations in the organization's environment. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop one of our malicious files onto the file system that will be used in this attack. So let's do that first. So we're going to go to the Kevin directory, to app data, to local, to temp. So really, all this is a temporary directory that's used by the Windows operating system. We're going to upload a file called sort.vbs, which is a Visual Basic script. We're going to put it in the temp directory. So as you can see, it's been uploaded. The second step, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the KeePass the KeyPass directory where the configuration file is stored. So let's do that. And here's the configuration file. The configuration file is an XML file. This is not an application. It's not an executable. It's really just plain text that's organized in a certain way. And this is the configuration file KeyPass is using. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this file over to our attacker box. So we're going to get the file. Now we're going to exit off the Windows workstation that we're connected to through the SMB protocol. And now what we're going to do is we're going to backdoor the XML file. So we have a script that does that. It's called backdoor. And simply run the script, and it's modified the configuration file to do our attack. So in the poison directory, here's the new configuration file. So now what we have to do is we have to upload this file back onto the Windows endpoint. Let's go ahead and do that. Connect back. And now we're going to go back to the directory where KeyPass is. And here we have the original configuration file. It's 4,300 bytes. There's a backup of it as well. So now what we're going to do is upload our version. So now if we look at it, it's about 5,300 bytes. So this is the backdoored XML file. So let's go ahead and exit. We're going to run our server. So what this is doing, it's just sitting there and waiting for the passwords to be sent to our command and control server, which is right here. So let's go back to the victim's workstation. We're going to go ahead and open up the password manager. We're going to put in our secret password. And we'll look over here, and there's nothing. As soon as I open up the KeyPass database, the passwords have been sent.
So interesting, hack if you've never seen that. So this is what I tell people is that, yeah, if someone gets on your desktop or can access your desktop, you could be game over. An additional risk you have to worry about is the password manager vendor themselves can be attacked. And this has happened a lot. LastPass, which is, again, one of the top password manager vendors, has been successfully compromised. I think I've heard they've been breached, or their data breached, or the program vulnerability breached something like 7 times. I mean, a lot. And on the, they are attacked. Every software vendor is attacked. Their company can be compromised. Their programs can have bugs. Their employees can be socially engineered. The network resources they could use can be hacked. LastPass, one of the most recent hacks on LastPass, their cloud storage provider vendor, was what was compromised. So, password manager vendors get hacked, and that is an additional consideration you have to consider when using a password manager. And just, password managers are software, and they have vulnerabilities just like anything else. On the left-hand side of the page where I have 6 vulnerabilities there, that I believe is for LastPass, a list of vulnerabilities for LastPass over the years. On the right-hand side of the screen where it has 10 vulnerabilities, that's for 1Password. But, I try to keep in mind to think that, really anybody can be hacked. There is no such thing as unhackable software. And every bit of software you're using either could be hacked or is hacked or has been hacked. The stuff that you love the most, the operating system that you love the most, whether it's Windows, Apple, Google, Linux, it's been hacked. The browser that you use every day has been hacked. The email client that you use every day has been hacked all the time. So just because something is hacked doesn't mean it's terrible or bad. It just means it was targeted. And it could mean that it has more vulnerabilities than some, but it's not necessarily meaning it's a bad thing. And bad password manager attacks have happened, like they have happened against LastPass a couple of times over the years. They've had, their databases and programs compromised. Although in the last attack, the user's encrypted passwords got compromised. But if you had a strong master password, 12 characters or longer, then probably your encrypted passwords are probably still safe. And LastPass has been requiring 12-character passwords, although not fully random, but at least 12-character passwords for at least a couple of years. But, I hear people going, I'm quitting. I'm not going to use this password manager. It's been hacked again, whether it's LastPass or some other password manager database. The vast majority of their users are still using the password manager programs and doing just fine. The sky isn't always falling. What I like to know, though, is does the password manager vendor try to stop password attacks or password manager attacks, and are they trying to be secure? And let me say that if all your passwords get compromised, the worst case scenario is that you have to quickly change all your passwords. And of course, if the hacker uses your compromised passwords against you before you're able to change your passwords, it can be really bad. But in most cases, all you have to do is change all your passwords. And that's a pain. That's a real pain. But that's usually the worst case. And most people aren't going to have all their money stolen right away and that sort of stuff. If you're pretty quick about going around and changing your passwords, it would be a bad day where you get to change all your passwords, but you probably haven't changed them in forever anyways, and so good time to go around and changing them. But I really care about with the password manager vendors, do they patch the bugs quickly when they find out about them? Do they seem to care about security? Are they getting compromised again and again and again and not really talking to end users and trying to make it stop? So the risk decision you need to make is that password managers reduce the huge risk of you using the same passwords on multiple websites or using weak passwords. That's a huge risk. That's how most people are compromised. But you have to weigh it against single point of failure. So I kind of put it in this chart here, this graph here. The idea that, the likelihood of you being compromised because you have either shared passwords or weak passwords, fairly high. Although I guess if someone compromises that, it's limited to, that password and whatever passwords that you share, what other websites might share that same password. But if your password manager, it's less likely to be exploited. But if it does, they get all your passwords at once. This is the ultimate risk decision. You have to decide about whether which one you like. I think that the risk of you being compromised because your weak password or shared passwords is far outweighs the risk from your password manager being exploited. And so I recommend that you use a password manager. So how should you best defend your password manager? Well, first of all, you want to choose a password manager that comes from a vendor that really cares about security. I like to know that the password manager vendor tells their developers to get secure development lifecycle programming, that they get training in how to be secure, to do secure programming. They use secure programming languages, what's called type-safe programming languages, and that they really care about educating. Most software developers get no security development lifecycle training. So if I find a password manager vendor that does train their staff in that, I'm really going to like that vendor. You want to make sure that vendor uses industry-accepted strong encryption and they don't roll their own. Some password manager vendors make their own encryption or modify an existing industry-accepted encryption protocol, and they modify it and customize it. That's not so good. You want to make sure that the vendor has strong defaults and strong security features, like maybe having MFA to protect it as an option versus just using a master password. They should be transparent in what they do. They should be responsive to the community, responsive to bug reports. I even love it when they have bug bounties, which is when they pay hackers to find bugs. That helps make the product stronger and better. And then ultimately it just comes down to, can you trust the vendor to protect your passwords? Do you trust the vendor? Some people do, some people don't, but I tend to trust most of the longer standing password manager vendors that I listed earlier on. But what you want to do to help yourself to have a good password manager experience is pick a good password manager and password manager vendor, as I kind of just covered. Watch out for those social engineering attacks. So if the auto logon feature is not working, stop and take a look before you just edit, copy, edit, paste your password. If you can, use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication to protect your password manager instead of a master password. That will prevent the hacker from keylogging your master password. And really overall, if you can use phishing-resistant MFA or passkeys or passwordless or something, protect your data and programs without using a password, that's even better. You do want to use a long master password, 20 characters or longer, if it's made up by you, for both your regular passwords and your master password. So you want your master password of a password manager program to be fairly long. Then hopefully that's the only one that you have to remember or type in. After that, your password manager creates and uses all the other perfectly random passwords You should change your passwords at least once a year in all your sites and services, regardless of whether you have a password manager or not. And that's because, again, as I showed, websites get compromised. Even the popular websites sometimes get compromised. And if you don't change your passwords, that means your valid passwords are out there forever, and the hackers can use them against you. Make sure you set a decent lockout interval on your password manager. Every time you go into a password manager new after a reboot for the first time, you're going to have to put in your master password to use your MFA. But then they'll relock it, so like every 10 minutes, every hour. Just some people will say never lock out, and that's not good, because that means if a hacker compromises your desktop, then they're immediately getting access to all your passwords, versus there being some chance, especially when you're asleep at night, that the password manager is locked and they don't get immediate access to all those controlled passwords. Make sure you don't get social engineered. Remember, social engineering is involved in 70 to 90% of all hacking. It is the most popular way that you could lose your password. Don't get socially engineered. Get good, aggressive security awareness training, and make sure that you don't get socially engineered even when you're using your password manager. Make sure to use autofill-in or auto-login instead. And if that doesn't work, then you stop and question and find out why it's not working. Make sure you patch your desktops and devices in a timely manner so the bad guy can't get onto your desktop. And look for and resolve any configuration mistakes you have with your password manager or just desktop in general. If you want to know whether or not you've already your password's been breached or not, you can download KnowBefore's breach password test. This works to check like all the users of a particular organization to see if their passwords are out there, like in the Have I Been Pwned databases. I don't know if they use Have I Been Pwned anymore, but we use a similar database to see whether your different passwords for you have been compromised. And it can be done for all the users within your company all at once, which is kind of a nice feature versus having to do them one at a time with Have I Been Pwned or something like that. At KnowBefore, we're very big believers in that everybody should get training at least once a month. Everybody should get simulated phishing at least once a month. And we do know that our customers that do train and do simulated phishing of their employees, that they significantly reduce the percentage of people that will be successfully phished. The average customer comes to us with about a third of their employees that can be easily phished. And after they get training in simulated phishing, that it falls to 5% or below 5%. And that means since social engineering is the number one way that people get compromised and the number one way that people lose their passwords, if you train them not to be phished and social engineered, that significantly protects you, them, and your organization. With that, I've run out of time. My name's Roger Grimes. If you have a question, feel free to email me at rogerg@knowbefore.com, rogerg@knowbefore.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I write about passwords and password managers all the time. And with that, thanks for putting up with me for the last hour, and I wish you good luck.
All right. Thanks, Roger. There was a lot of great advice over the last hour. I've been taking copious notes, and thanks for the offer to get back to people on their questions. That email address for Roger again is rogerg@knowbefore.com. And for those of you who submitted questions in the console, we'll pass those along too. Meanwhile, don't forget about the link in your handout section to learn more about KnowBefore and their security training services and resources. Finally, it's time for our Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $250 Amazon gift card today is Aaron Shovik from Wisconsin. So congratulations to Aaron Shovik. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank KnowBefore for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes this event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.